Welcome to the Bourbon Speculators podcast, the podcast where we talk about bourbons, whiskeys, and other booze, as well as other fun stuff. My name is Charlie, and I'm here with
Chad,
the General, and Chip, our engineer. So pull up a chair, let us pour one for you, and enjoy.
You're listening to the Bourbon Speculators podcast, the show for news, reviews, and general awesomeness around the world of bourbon. Podcasted in Bond from the heart of Kentucky's bourbon country, with your hosts, Charlie, Chad, and the General. Smell the corn mash, feel the Kentucky hug, and have a sip of your favorite amber gold as you enjoy this episode of the Bourbon Speculators podcast.
Today we're going to be talking about Jack Daniel's and Jim Beam, the two mainstays, I think, in the whiskey world.
Probably the two most recognizable names throughout the world for bourbon/whiskey.
And we've got these two decanters here that have no names on them. And our challenge is to see if we can discern between which is which. We'll put our taste buds to the test and see if we can actually find out the difference between a Kentucky bourbon and a Tennessee whiskey.
I believe these are also two of the most highly purchased boozes in the world. I believe if you combine both of these together, the regular Jim Beam and the Jack Daniel's Black, I would say they make a huge portion of the total whiskeys purchased in the world.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
So let's jump right in. I am judging that this is going to be a hard contest. As far as color goes, they look just to be about identical.
Quite similar in color.
I'll set this up for the audience. So,
Flash about the same as well.
As the one who's not participating in the contest, I took Jack Daniel's and Jim Beam out of the room, away from these guys, and filled the decanters. Only I know which one is which, and we're going to see if these guys can live up to their reputations as wizards of the bourbon world.
Or as amateurs who are going to guess with a 50-50 chance. I will say one difference. I'm noticing that as we swirl it around in the glass decanters, one of them, the legs, as it's called, kind of the oils and things that come down the side of the glass slowly, are taking a lot longer in one of the decanters than it is the other. However, that doesn't tell me which one it is.
It just tells you that they might be different kinds of glass.
Or different kind of booze, which I'm really hoping that we sample two different flavors here.
So, General, you had a few notes that you wanted to kind of go over as we were talking through this beforehand. And
Well, besides the basic differences between Jim and Jack, one being a bourbon, one being a whiskey, we can I'll let him, getting into that a little bit. But the Jim Beam is 77% corn, 30% rye, and 10% barley. And Jack is 80% corn, 12% barley, and 8% rye. So there's our initial differences in our taste profile. So the Jim has a little bit more rye, which usually makes it a little bit more spicier. And the Jack has a little bit less rye, so it might be a little less spicier, but that might be helpful or might not be helpful.
do you guys have any experience with either of these whiskeys? And if so, when?
I don't have very much experience with these. I'm as I mentioned in the previous podcast, I think all three of us usually drink our bourbons neat. And, where I come from, it's the General Jim and Jack, General, no pun intended, is a mixing beverage. So whether that's, something that the company agrees with or not, that's just historically how, where I come from, how they're drank.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. I would consider these mixers at a get-together, a party, or with friends. Neither one of these would be an adult beverage that I would feel offended or saddened if someone were to mix a carbonated drink with them, like a Coke or a Sprite or even a ginger ale.
So for me, I was thinking about this as we were kind of preparing for this episode of the show. there are some interesting memories associated with both of these whiskeys. In fact, so years ago, I was going on a trip with some friends, and this wasn't many years ago, probably 2 years ago. I was traveling overseas, and on the flight, they had complimentary beverages. And so I was surprised to see that they were willing to give us free booze. And I was like, all right, cool. I'll take a bourbon. What do you got on the bourbon list? And they were like, well, we have Jack Daniels. I was like, oh, that's not bourbon, actually. But I'll take it, you know. And I got 3 or 4 of those, put them in my pockets, and kept them until we were at our landing zone. And so I got to have some, like, you know, enjoyable booze on the other side of my trip. And then, in fact, on the exact same trip, we were visiting a family that also particularly enjoyed bourbon. And so we didn't think about this fact until we were in the airport. And so the duty free zone, we got to buy some Jim Beam white label in the airport, because that was really kind of the choices we were given. There's not a lot. There was like some I think there were some Scotch whiskeys and some other things that you could get at the airport. But the only bourbon that we could get in Detroit was Jim Beam white label. And so we brought this with us on our trip, and I'm a Louisville football fan. I enjoy the Louisville Cardinals football team. At least I have in the past. Haven't been able to as much lately just because of business and the distractions that come with that. And we were watching, and I just distinctly remember this experience. We were watching the football game and having this bourbon together. And I just have this like familial experience. I'm with my friends. We're watching a football game together in another country. And so there's some cool memories associated with both of these drinks. And so I'm kind of excited about trying to figure out which one's which in our little taste test here. So
nice. Well, I think, gentlemen, without further ado, let's go ahead and pour one of them out.
All right, we'll go with the camera angle left booze and decide which one is which here.
I think one of the other important points about the Tennessee whiskey is the fact that after they're done, they pour it over the charred
charcoal filter.
Yeah, charcoal filtering. I don't believe
it's maple charcoal made on site, by the way.
Is it really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Good words.
And it's fascinating to watch them do it. It's just like it melted my lens shade on my camera one time when we were trying to film that at Jack Daniels. So,
whoa.
The filmmaker's input.
Gentlemen, may you be in heaven 15 minutes before the devil knows you're dead.
You're here.
Now, before we taste these, let me give a little bourbon tasting 101, since that's the main focus of our show. So if you come to one of the 3 bourbon trails, which is the Bourbon Trail, the Urban Bourbon Trail, and the Craft Bourbon Trail here in Kentucky, if you visit a number of distilleries, they'll tell you how to nose your bourbon and taste your bourbon. So the first time, nosing your bourbon requires you to put your nose in the cup, but keeping your mouth open and inhaling to give you some of what they call the nose of the bourbon. So the keeping the mouth opens allows a little bit of the bourbon to go over your taste buds, which also affects your smell. So if you nose your bourbons, put it in like you're sticking your nose in the cup, mouth open, and inhale through your nose.
I do not recommend taking the nose all the way into a splashdown mode, because that does sting a little.
I would also not recommend that.
Do not breathe your bourbon.
Smell
it and waft it.
The other part of the bourbon tasting experience is what they call the Kentucky Chew. So what the Kentucky Chew is you take a sip of your bourbon, and before swallowing the bourbon, you chew it in your mouth a little bit like you're chewing gum or chewing tobacco or whatever you might chew. So allows the bourbon to coat all parts of your tongue. And then once you chew it a little bit, you swallow it, and then the fun part is you smack your tongue on your mouth, which also helps you experience some of the different tasting notes. So When you come to the Bourbon Trail, you will be now a bourbon tasting expert.
Aficionado. Maybe we're
Without
drinking
further
bourbon.
ado,
We might not be, but we might be.
Cilantro.
I've got a guess.
This is not an ASMR podcast, but it's feeling like it right now.
I think I may have aspirated some bourbon.
Yeah, something just happened.
What
to
does that
Chad.
taste like to you, Chad?
Well, the great news, I no longer have any form of bronchitis or any bronchial infections. I don't recommend that. My goodness gracious.
the Kentucky Chew takes practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I will firmly take my ranking as a newbie trying that. My goodness.
Is that how the fish died in the mile of creek after the Barton Distillery went down? General?
Yeah,
They tried to breathe in the bourbon water. Just couldn't do it.
too soon, Charlie. Too soon.
We officially give our apologies to the Barton Distillery and the family.
And also all the fishies. And the fishy families.
Yeah, okay, them too.
1797 is awesome.
VOB is my favorite, like, go-to sometimes.
92.
Like, I'll just, $10.
Sorry, 1797 is J Town's former date.
What? Date?
We're talking about Barton 1792.
And I mistakenly said 1797 because that's a specific date for the city of Jeffersontown. So.
Guys,
I've got a guess, but I want to taste the other one first.
I have no clue.
I don't have a guess at this point.
No, nothing.
I have no. Get number 2 going because we'll just a bunch of dead air if we don't.
You guys want to wash out your glasses?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
So we're going to do a little glass cleansing rinse with something called water, bottled water for you fancy folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you would like to sponsor our bottled water, please send us an email to bourbonspeculators@gmail.com.
If you're watching on video, you can see that this bottle is
quite
unbranded and,
Quite naked.
yeah, pulled the
I
label
will
off on
say
purpose.
there is a new distillery that I cannot name at the moment that has the largest supply of limestone water, an aquifer underneath their distillery. It's going to be awesome, and we're going to try to get some water from there because they're already bottling it. And
Awesome.
we'll bring that in, and when we can announce that distillery, you'll hear it here first, I'm almost sure.
Breaking news brought to you by Bourbon Speculators.
And I will say that since we are talking about
Just a
Jim
little bit
Beam,
more.
if Mila Kunis, who is Jim Beam's spokesman, would like to come to Louisville, Kentucky, and be a part of our podcast, we would be happy to host you right here in this room.
And then there's that. So,
Is that how you say her name?
Yeah, we can cut that out.
Is that how you're supposed to say her name? I've
Mila
never actually
Kunis?
heard her
Yeah.
say her own
Mila
name.
Kunis.
Mila?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Because Hooked on Phonics would go with Mila, in my opinion.
It's Mila Kunis.
Okay.
I promise you. I'm well aware.
and we'll cut there.
Yeah, we're gonna edit.
All right, let me. I want to give my toast. You guys keep having your toast, and I've never had a toast. So, and what you give, may you find again, and when found, be it many times multiplied to you and to yours. You're here.
Here.
Clinkety clank.
Don't forget to nose it before you taste it.
I'm going to recommend not aspirating on round 2. It's a little more familiar. It's a little smoother. I still don't have a distinct first response. Gentlemen, this is a tougher challenge than what I anticipated. I anticipated
That's distinct.
a very distinct, I don't know what's another adjective, a line of demarcation where we could choose one over the other very easily. And guys, I don't think I have that.
I think I'm 75% confident.
That's it's about 96% more than mine.
My guess is going to be a real good guess.
I may actually pull a coin out of my pocket.
I'm going to go with, so I told you guys beforehand that I was just going to pick the opposite of whatever both of you guys picked. But I'll take the lead on it.
Okay.
And you guys can pick the opposite of me if you want.
If we so choose.
If you want, yeah.
Probably should have just wrote it down. Would have been easier. But
Little blind. Okay.
So I think...
I already got my opinion formed, so I'll just put that out there right now.
I don't know what you just said.
I have my own opinion formed right now. So
good. I heard I have my uniform on, so my ears are
I
broken.
don't wear a uniform, so...
When you're a general, no uniform is necessary.
I think that what we currently have in our glass right now is Jim Beam White. And I think that what we drank first is the Jack. That's my opinion.
Interesting thing about this contest and your opinion. This is one of the very few instances where your opinion can just be flat out wrong. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. I'm going to go the opposite.
Opinions are like buttholes, right?
Everybody has one and almost all of them stink. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to see yours either.
That's true. It's wrong podcast. Wrong podcast. I'm going to say that this is Jack Daniels in our glass now. Just to play the odds.
Give me a little curveball there. I'll take a little curveball.
And then I think that our first bourbon was Jim Beam.
Well, I have to concur with Charlie. I believe our first bourbon was Jack Daniels, and the one that we have in our glass currently, the second one, was Jim Beam.
Engineer Chip, could you enlighten us?
Well, let me ask you a question.
Pull these guys out here.
Why does anybody have some reasoning behind the choice? I mean, is there something
Mine is
that
pure
in your
guess.
history or the taste or anything that, I mean, what was your...
Well, they both kind of tasted like 7th grade to me, but that was products of a misspent youth. And we'll talk about that on another podcast.
Okay.
The only experience that I have with any of these Jim and Jack is my grandfather used to make his old fashions with Jim Beam White Label. But you can't really compare a neat taste test to a old-fashioned taste test. So maybe if we would have made old-fashions with the two, I could have pulled it out a little bit better. But
let the taste bring back the memory.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing for me that's leading me to my conclusions is just what I was telling earlier. The stories of time with friends and families and people that I care about. And I think that oftentimes just like a song will remind you of a place and a time. I think a taste will do that too. And these are very similar tastes. And don't get me wrong, like this is legitimately just a guess. But I don't know. I think that there's like your heart remembers things, and there's moments of reminiscence and clarity that comes to point. So, and I'd be happy to be wrong on this one too. So neither of these are my number one go-tos all the time.
So this is the way that you think the bottle should be set.
At this point, yes. Yeah. So I have the, for those of you listening, our first drink was, in my guess, the Jack, and then the second drink was the Jim. So,
and I concur with that.
And
Chad's
I'm going the other way just to be the 12th man. So
appreciate that, man.
All right. So I'm going to just give a dramatic pause here so I can insert a sound effect of this. And the answer is Charlie is correct. Skull decanter is Jack Daniels, and the other decanter is Jim Beam. So the General and Charlie are correct. Chad, sorry, no prize.
Booze so much better than you. We're like way
you
better.
guys are brilliant, or you have a problem.
It's funny because it's purely based on memory. Like I'm saying, like this was I don't know if this is like I'm a bourbon podcast person, like if I should say this out loud, but like I think I've only had both of these drinks one time. Right? Like a little bit of white and then a little bit of Jack Daniels. But those two times were very distinct memories in my head, you know, and they stand out. to me.
Good call, man.
Maybe the Jim Beam sticks out a little bit more in my grandfather's old fashions than I thought. So,
Well, the nice thing about this one is that, these are obviously readily available. They're relatively inexpensive compared to some other things. So at home, I mean, it's very easy to, on a Friday night or something, if you guys want to recreate this little challenge, do it with your friends,
And you could probably do the whole challenge for less than $30.
I have
This
so
is
many
true.
friends from high school and college that this was the go-to for all of them when they were drinking illegally. So my friends who are out there potentially listening to this, I'm not going to name any names, but to be honest, like, I enjoyed both of these on some level. They're like, I feel like when we talk about this stuff, it can be easy to just start to think about, like, okay, well, this is like a run-of-the-mill, normal, whiskey. But at the same time, like, there's a reason why it's become great, right? Like, it's a reason why it's a household name. Everybody knows Jack. Everybody knows Jim, right? They're the familiar people. I'm one who I like unique. I like unique flavors. That's part of the reason why in episode 1 or 2 we talked about our particular favorites under 50, right? And these don't stand out as distinctive to me, right? They're very similar in taste to each other, in my opinion. But this is like the kind of stuff that, like, we can have around a fire. We can have watching a game. We can have on an airplane flight overseas. Like, that's one of those things that it becomes a familiar taste that becomes a comfort in some regards. And so, like, if you are one who thinks that you're, like, above having a common bourbon or a common Tennessee whiskey, don't think that way, right? Like,
I would challenge that.
put yourself down just a little bit, because there's a humility that I want to encourage with everyone, like, to say there's something you can get from each experience that you walk through. And to me, both of those memories that came to mind, and I'm just thinking back about this and, like, almost wanting to get emotional in some regards, just thinking about the conversations that we were having around, on the airplane seats, and who we were talking to and who was all present. And then later on with the Jim Beam, like, watching the football game and celebrating with each other and crying with each other after losing the game eventually. And so the interesting thing about this is that those two experiences happened while enjoying something that's very familiar. Very familiar. So what do you think, you guys? You want to call it? You got any more to say?
I think we're good. I think it was a really good test.
It was a fun test.
Yeah.
All right, so if you have enjoyed this, if you want to communicate with us in any special way, whether you want to give it a try, go and get yourself a bottle of white and Jim Beam white and some Jack Daniel's black. Do your own taste test and let us know what your results are. If you have any questions for us, if you just want to check out some cool stuff on our website, go to www.bourbonspeculators.com, or you can send us an email direct at bourbonspeculators@gmail.com. Thanks again, and we enjoyed drinking with you guys.
see you next time, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining the Bourbon Speculators as we sample, review, and rate Kentucky's native spirit from some of Kentucky's finest distilleries. Please share the show with someone you know. Drop us a line at bourbonspeculators@gmail.com. Rate and review us on iTunes. And find the Bourbon Speculators on YouTube for the video version of the show. We look forward to having you back on the Bourbon Speculators podcast.